Here, Bucky Brooks, DJ on the other end. It's that time of year, our favorite time. We're getting close to the combine. So, DJ, let's rip through your top 50. Let's talk about the top 50 prospects in this 2020 draft class. Let's go right now. Who's your number one guy?
Well, we start at number one. I don't think he's going to be the number one pick, but Chase Young from Ohio State is the best player, the most talented player in this year's draft class. And Buck, just somebody that can win in every kind of way. He can win with his burst off the edge. He's got outstanding hands. He's got power. And people like to talk about him not finishing up the year as strong as you would like. I beg to differ. You go back and watch those games, and while the sacks might not have been there, very disruptive, drawing a lot of attention, a lot of pressures, a lot of hits. Chase Young, to me, is the best player in this draft.
It's interesting because in looking at your list, there's 6 edge rushers that are included in the top 50. Everyone knows about Chason and A.J. Espinosa and Marlon Davidson, but there are 2 other guys. They kind of came on, and they kind of came on well at the Senior Bowl. Bradley Anae and Terrell Lewis. Why do you like those guys?
Yeah, you start Bradley Anae, who's my 48th player, was dominant there at the Senior Bowl and was really more of what you've seen when you study him there at Utah. When they're going up against good competition, you watch him against USC. They got a fine tackle there in Austin Jackson. He performed very well against him. It's all his hands, Buck. He's quick. He's not the most explosive guy in the world, but he's very quick. He's got great hands, and he knows how to finish as an edge rusher. The production backs that up with Bradley Anae, and was really, truthfully, the most dominant player in the Senior Bowl game, so really finished it up on a strong note. And then you look at Terrell Lewis. Terrell Lewis is, I would say, almost a polar opposite type player, where he's got everything you want in terms of the size, the length, the twitch, the burst, the explosiveness, but very raw. Needs to work on developing a plan as a rusher. He's a little bit better right now when they let him he's more of a blitzer than a rusher, better on games. You'll see him loop around, just use that athleticism. Has some work to do to refine his hands, but you do see flashes of that speed, the power that he possesses. Obviously, the length is a huge deal there. So he, to me, is hanging on there at the back end of the top 50. As I continue to do more of these juniors and more of these guys as we go through the process, we'll see if he can hang on in there.
It's funny because you and I have talked about the formula for building a team and building a championship team. And on defense, we always talk about you have to have 2 pass rushers. Normally, most people think, hey, it's 2 edge rushers coming off opposite sides. But of late, we've seen an outside guy and an inside guy. There's a player in this draft, Derrick Brown, who gets a lot of love. Talk about him and talk about some of the other defensive tackles in this class.
Yeah, Derrick Brown for me is I have the same grade on him as I have on Chase Young. He's the second best player in this draft. He's phenomenal. You talk about just raw power inside. Watch him throw around dudes. He can really bend and snap and uncoil. Real loose, strong, physical player. And the thing that I love most about him, Buck, is gifted as he is how hard he plays. You watch him chase plays across the field horizontally. You watch him chase plays down the field. Does not take snaps off, and just a consistently dominant player. So that, to me, is why I have him as the second best player in this draft class.
Look, I believe toughness and energy, effort, I think those are traits. Those are things that we certainly look for in disruptive players. There are a couple other guys, Javon Kinlaw, Ross Blacklock, guys that we both have talked about on podcasts before. We like those guys. But Neville Gallimore, and then there's another player, a mystery player that I want you to talk about at the defensive tackle spot. Talk about those guys.
Yeah, sure. You're talking about Neville Gallimore at 37, right behind him, Justin Madubuike from Texas A&M, who I think's got a chance to move up this list and get into the top 32 players. Both guys really, really twitched up, real explosive players. Madubuike probably a little more play strength than Gallimore. These guys, I want guys that can play on the other side of the line of scrimmage. Do it with some knockback, which both these guys have, but really the ability to get on an edge of a blocker and get upfield and penetrate. They can do that extremely well. You mentioned Kinlaw and Blacklock. Kinlaw dominated at the Senior Bowl when he was down there before he exited after a couple days, but they couldn't block him. His length was a major asset in the inside. And then Blacklock, he's had some injuries, had an Achilles earlier on in his career. But this year when you watch the tape, one of my favorite players, just because I like to watch the tape and I like to see the get off. I want to freeze it each and every snap. And he is ahead of everybody on that front each and every snap. Tremendous get off, tremendous burst.
I know you have to like the way that we started this. We've always talked about defense wins championships, but really franchise quarterbacks are what give you an opportunity to get into the tournament and really to go far in the tournament. So let's turn our attention to the quarterbacks, and everyone wants to know, What do you feel about Joe Burrow? Is Joe Burrow their franchise quarterback in this draft?
I think so. I have him as the top quarterback, my number 3 overall player, and you will not find a better season. Obviously, statistically, you throw 60 touchdowns. It is what it is. But when you watch him each and every game, Buck, there aren't bad games. There's very few bad moments with Joe Burrow, and it's working through progressions, getting the ball out on time, pocket awareness, pocket feel, being able to climb and move inside the pocket, and then knowing when there's a lane that opens up and taking it with your athletic ability. He does not have the huge arm, and I know people will look at the 1 year of production, but when you look at him having a chance to operate in a system that fits him, which is important. I don't necessarily think you drop Joe Burrow into any offense and think he's going to be wildly successful. You got to have a system that fits him. But, man, you saw it with Joe Brady coming from that Sean Payton system with the New Orleans Saints, and he executed it beautifully. And to me, Buck, I think he's a safe pick, provided you know how to use him and put him in the right system, because decision-making accuracy, poise, off the charts. It
really off the charts, and this would be a great conversation and debate to have if Tua was healthy and we could see which guy was really the number 1 guy, but he's not healthy. So we won't talk about Tua in this, but I do believe there are a couple other guys that are worth talking about. We have Jordan Love, Justin Herbert, Jacob Eason, and Jake Fromm in your top 50. The conversation, I believe, is the Jordan Love Justin Herbert conversation. We just are coming off a week where we saw those guys in the Senior Bowl. How would you rank them? How would you stack those 2 players?
Well, right now, as you see on the list here, I've got Jordan Love 1 spot over Herbert. Now, I think if you go off the Senior Bowl, what we saw down there for that week, I think Justin Herbert had a more consistent week. I'd phrase it this way. Justin Herbert has a higher floor. Love has a higher ceiling. So with Love, you get a little more variance. The first day of practice down there wasn't great, and then you saw him put up 2 really, really impressive days. Justin Herbert, steady Eddie all through the week, a real solid game as well. I thought that was kind of indicative of what you saw from these guys on tape. Now, if you go back and watch Jordan Love in 2018 under a different coaching staff with more talent around him, to me, I think that slants more favorably in his direction. So that's the challenge, sorting these 2 guys out, trying to explain the poor season statistically for Jordan Love this year, and then trying to figure out what you have with a big-time quarterback there at Herbert, who is just very, very consistent and steady. Necessarily, how high is the upside? That's the debate to have.
Look, it's a lot. It'll be a great debate, and eventually there'll be a conversation and a debate on Jacob Eason and where he kind of slots in with his quarterback class. But it's one that we will continue to advance. I think the other thing that is interesting, whenever we talk about quarterbacks, eventually we have to talk about pass catchers, the wide receivers, the playmakers on the perimeter. There are a number of guys, 9, that you have included in your top 50. Who is the best wide receiver in your estimation in this class?
Well, I still think it's a 3-man race, and I have more work to do on these guys, but the way I stacked it up right now, CeeDee Lamb, followed by Jerry Jeudy, and then Henry Ruggs, the explosive receiver from Alabama, Jerry Jeudy's teammate there. But when you go through those top 3 guys, CeeDee Lamb, Buck, the physicality, what he does after the catch, his ability to fight and compete for the ball down the field, those 50-50 balls down in the red zone as well. That's why I gave him the edge. Jerry Jeudy, a little more sudden. Jerry Jeudy, a little bit more polished as a route runner. But I thought the physicality and what he does after the catch is why I gave CeeDee Lamb the nod there. But I'm telling you, do not sleep on Henry Ruggs, because every team in the league is trying to find their version of a Tyreek Hill. Somebody that's just, can score from anywhere on the field, can get over the top of coverage. You can also just flip the ball out to him in the flat and watch him go. We get to the combine, Buck. He's going to put on a show. I don't know what the third number is going to be, but I know what the first 2 numbers are going to be. It's going to be 4-2 something, and that is going to be fun to watch.
It's funny because we talk about speed, and you mentioned the top 3 guys: Lamb, Jeudy, Ruggs. Justin Jefferson is in there. Brandon Ayuk, who we both talked about being a special player. But there's some other guys that are also worthy of mentioning. Who are some of the other guys that we should talk about when it comes to this wide receiver class, earning the distinction of being in your top 50?
Yeah, Laviska Shenault from Colorado, who's one of the best overall athletes in this draft class. He plays some Wildcat quarterback. You can get him on some fly sweeps. Still developing as a route runner, but big, physical, and fast. And then you go to 29 with T. Higgins, who is the acrobatic, play above the rim X-receiver that teams are looking for. It's just a real smooth, easy mover. Not as sudden or quite as twitched up as some of these other guys, but definitely that power forward a lot of teams are looking for. Hamler from Penn State. KJ Hamler, big time speed. Has some drops, You got to get comfortable with that. But he, again, can be your gadget guy, fly sweeps, get vertical down the field. And then finally, you've got Michael Pittman there from USC. Big, strong, aggressive, physical, 50-50 balls. I'd put him up with anybody in this entire draft class. That's what he does. Not going to get as much separation as some of these other guys, Buck, but third down, red zone, that size and physicality plays.
Yeah, it does play. And you talk about the physicality, and you also alluded to some of the running skills that some of these guys have. Let's move on to the running back position. It's one of those tricky positions when it comes to draft day. Some people prefer to get their running backs late. Some people get them early. When you look at this class, what do you think and who do you like?
I think it's a really good group. And you start with my top guy there with Deandre Swift, who is a top 15 player in my opinion. We'll see where he slots in the draft. But three-down guy, can block, can catch, runs with power inside. He's got enough juice to hit the edge and hit some home runs for you as well. I think he's an outstanding prospect. J.K. Dobbins, I know the last image for some folks is him dropping a couple passes in that playoff game against Clemson. But somebody that's really instinctive, very physical, always fighting for extra yards, and I do think is better in the passing game than what we saw in that Clemson affair. Jonathan Taylor from Wisconsin has some fumble issues, Buck, but big-time speed-power combination. I think one-cut schemes are going to love him. Get your foot in the ground and go. You'll see that burst play. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire from LSU. He might be, while he's not my top running back, he might be my favorite to watch because third down, his ability to deploy. You can use him in the backfield, you can put him in the slot, you can split him out wide, watch him run routes, separate, get open, and just refuses to go down on that initial contact. He's one, Buck, as I continue to do more tape and study these guys, he's somebody I would expect is going to move up as we go through the process.
Well, there are plenty of guys that are moving up as we move our attention towards the offensive line. There's a guy, Mekhi Becton from Louisville, who is beginning to get a lot of attention and a lot of love. You've certainly shown him some love by putting him within the top 10 of your list. Why?
Yeah, big, physical, strong, athletic. He's just a rare package when you look at his size and his ability to move. Just swallows up pass rushers. And then the run game, it's just one knockdown after another. It's just so physical, so strong, and so tough. He's a difference maker. You think back to Bryant McKinney, the career he had. I think Mekhi Becton is a similar player, I think even with more upside than somebody like Big McKinney. Jedrick Wills, followed up by Tristan Wirfs. Both those guys, really, really solid, strong players. Wills is in the discussion to me to be the top tackle in the draft. Wirfs, I like him potentially kicking inside and being a guard at the next level. I think he could be an all-pro level guard. Some teams have him a tackle. I like him inside. And then when you look at the rest of the guys there in the top 50, Andrew Thomas from Georgia, big, strong, very, very nimble for a guy with his physique. Like to see him maybe lean up a little bit and just stay off the ground, Buck. He's on the ground a little bit too much. That's his issue. Austin Jackson from USC,
talented. Very
athletic, just needs to get a little stronger. Very talented. And then Cesar Ruiz is a center there from Michigan. Just a steady Eddie. Know exactly what you're getting from him.
So we spent time talking about building up the trenches on both sides of the ball, but you and I both have an affinity for the guys that play in space on the defense side of the ball. Let's talk about these corners. Let's talk about the guys that can really lock up and match up. Is there anyone here that you believe is a top 5 player at cornerback?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Jeffrey Okudah is an outstanding player, and you're looking for comparisons. Who does he remind you of? I think you look at Jalen Ramsey when he entered the draft. I think there's a lot of similarities there. If you look and you watch the New England Patriots this year and you see Stephon Gilmore, he reminds me a lot of Gilmore when he was coming out of South Carolina. These are elite special players, size, length, explosiveness, awareness, toughness. He checks all those boxes, Buck. He's my 5th overall player. And then behind him, a couple other interesting guys. You look at C.J. Henderson, 23 from Florida, who is going to put on a show at the Combine. You talk about explosive and fast. Excellent playing the football. Tackling is a little bit of the concern there. Jalen Johnson, outstanding in 2018. Wasn't challenged much this year. The corner from Utah, as all Utah players, Buck. Love his physicality and toughness.
You know, in thinking about it, one of the things that we have noticed in the past few years, there's a run on cornerbacks that typically happens at the bottom of the first round, top of the second round. Who are some of those guys that kind of fall into that mix that are borderline first, second round players?
Yeah, you see the list right here. A.J. Terrell from Clemson, tall, long, rangy, really interesting player. Christian Fulton from LSU. Look, Buck, I don't think he's going to be the fastest guy, not super twitched up, but always in phase, always in position. Very competitive player there. To me, I think you look at some of the other corners that have come through LSU. I don't necessarily put him all the way up there with guys like Tre'Davious White, but I think he's going to be a steady Eddie, dependable player. Damon Arnett, a little bit tight there from Ohio State, but can play nickel, can play outside, very tough, very fast. Jeff Gladney is kind of like a little junkyard dog, a little undersized, a Jason Verrett type player when he was coming out of TCU. And then Trevon Diggs there from Alabama, obviously the brother of Stephon Diggs, the great receiver for the Minnesota Vikings. Movement, ball skills, fluidity, he's got that big time. The top speed would be the one question mark there.
You know, it's funny because we talk about question marks, and a lot of times those question marks for most teams center around the safety position. It's just hard to find guys that have the ability to drop down in the box but have the range to cover the middle of the field from numbers to numbers. When we look at this safety class, do you see any blue chip players in the class?
Yeah, and it's interesting with Isaiah Simmons. Some teams are going to list him as a linebacker, some as a safety. He's just a defensive weapon to me, and he is, somebody. If you look at how Derwin James can play all these different spots on the defense, Isaiah Simmons is that type of a player, an outstanding player. Speed, range, instincts. He can cover in the slot, which is incredible. He can be a down force safety. He could be a will linebacker. I mean, he can do so many different things for your defense. That's why he's my 4th overall player. And then 2 interesting safeties from the SEC. Xavier McKinney from Alabama, who does everything well, Buck. I don't know that he's exceptional in any category, but he can do everything. Play high, down in the box, force player, cover some in the slot, be your communicator. He does all those things. Grant Delpit, I thought his play slipped a little bit this year, some of that due to injury, but a pure high safety that can also cover some in the slot. A really good football player.
Look, all those guys are really good football players, and I don't think they get enough credit. And I think another overlooked position would be linebacker. There's some guys that maybe not marquee names, but there's some guys that can be some impact players. Who are some of the guys that you believe will impact the game from the linebacker position?
Well, we talk about it. Run, cover, hit. I mean, that's what you got to do right now at the linebacker position. And I've got 3 here. Patrick Queen from LSU, a little undersized, but can fly. The range, sideline to sideline. He can cover. He's an outstanding explosive blitzer. He's a playmaker there. I love his game. Kenneth Murray, similar type player, outstanding range. I think instinct-wise a little bit behind Patrick Queen. That would be the only knock on Murray, but man, he can run, and you can use him in coverage as well. And then Zach Bond is more of kind of a hybrid edge rusher from Wisconsin. He's my 44th player. He's real nimble coming off the edge. He can dip and rip, really good with his hands. You could use him to play over the tight end. He can cover tight ends. Some people view him off the ball. Buck, I prefer him on the line of scrimmage. I think 3-4 outside linebacker would be a great spot for him.
Look, man, there are a lot of talented players. There are a lot of talented players in the top 50. And I know the great thing about the top 50, it is very fluid. Lots of movement coming on. So we'll see after the Combine how many of the guys still remain. But the great thing is anyone that wants to check out all of our videos, they can check out our videos at NFL.com/MTS video. Also on our new YouTube channel and YouTube.com/NFL podcast.